Welcome back into Surviving Paradise. I am the host of this little podcast where we take a look at some of my own experiences and observations in the amazing spiritual paradise that is Jehovah's Witnesses. Thanks for joining us this week. I wanted to tackle a subject, and I want to preface this entire thing that I fear with this subject, there's a good chance I'm going to be all over the board and somewhat disorganized as I try to hone my thoughts, memories, and personal experiences as a Jehovah's Witness elder in this case on this particular subject. And I thought it would be interesting to tackle, and there's probably not enough time in this world, and it certainly is probably going to take several episodes as this thing grows to explain. And that is the subject of the infamous star chamber arrangement among Jehovah's Witnesses, otherwise known as the Judicial Committee. Judicial matters and everything that surrounds it. And I'm going to really try to stay away this week from the subject of shunning and disfellowshipping because it is a very, very, very serious subject that I don't feel like I can do justice to as we tackle just kind of some of the surrounding experiences and some of my own observations. And of course, tackling the whys, the wheres, and the hows of the Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee. And I think what's interesting, and this is one of the areas that I don't think has changed dramatically like so many other things among Jehovah's Witnesses since I've been out. And if you're new to this podcast, I have been out of Jehovah's Witnesses in very, very early 2009. I made my exit. At that time, I was probably 2.5 years or so removed as an elder, of which I served as for 11 years as the Watchtower study conductor for 8, book study conductor for almost as much, all the other crazy titles and privileges that come with being an elder. I don't want to run through that bio each and every week, although sometimes I throw it out there so that you have a kind of an understanding of the platform and really what it is we're going to talk about. So I want to take a look at this matter of judicial meetings and really just right from the outset, the damn absurdity of them. In most of what Jehovah's Witnesses believe and do, they try to find some crazy verse or sentence or semantic. They lift it, as I've called in past episodes, I call it Christianity a la carte, from the Bible, or in many cases, their own literature that could be decades old, to support some doctrine, habit, or belief that they continue to promote, that they continue to uphold. Judicial committees gets into weird territory, very, very weird territory, in my opinion, because there's literally nothing to support it. Nothing. Judicial committees in their current form among Jehovah's Witnesses are completely and unashamedly man-made. There's nothing to support them. You could make an argument that the Judicial Committee, and to give an overview for somebody who might be new or just learning or had never been in one or had never led one, I've had the opportunity to do both of those things. Judicial committees are when you do something naughty, you commit a sin. We won't get into all the sins that require a Judicial Committee because that list is long and frankly absurd. One of them is taking blood to save your own life. Instant Judicial Committee. Maybe we will get into that. I digress. Maybe we will. But if you're new to this, what happens then is if your sin comes to light, whether you confess it or, as is wildly promoted among Jehovah's Witnesses, you go out of your way to go tell the elders that you know someone has done something wrong and you have evidence of that, or you've heard a rumor. They then go into the B school and they form a judicial committee. And I will get into that here in a moment. But that's what a judicial committee is. Format-wise, again, for those who are not familiar with this, no women are allowed to be on a judicial committee unless they're the sinner. This takes place at the hands of the congregation elders. In other words, 3 dudes. And no matter what the situation may be, what the sin may be, or how sensitive or how dangerous or nuanced, anywhere you want to put to this, no matter what it might be, you're getting three dudes. Because as we've learned and will continue to learn among Jehovah's Witnesses, women have no rights. They have no ability to judge or teach. And if they do, they got to put a napkin on their head to show respect for men and angels. True story. See past episodes. But a judicial committee usually comes with real ominous tones. If you're invited to one, whether you've, again, confessed or someone caught you in a sin, you can almost cue the Darth Vader music. Dun, 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 dun. That's what goes down, whether it's emotionally, subconsciously, or anything else. You know you're going to end up, usually late at night after a meeting, back in the B school with 6 eyes from 3 dudes that you may know well, you may not, we'll get into that, are about to unpack the most private, gratuitous, and possibly painful thing you've ever been through. Isn't that loving? Because that's what they claim it is. It's all based on love. Jehovah's Witnesses claim that the motive behind a judicial committee is to win the sinner back. Let me assure you that is, I want to be careful about too many blanket comparisons, because there are really well-intentioned men that serve as elders and may want to really help someone. But let me tell you, that's fairly rare that it happens. And that doesn't mean to say that everything ends up in a disfellowshipping and you're kicked from the congregation and shunned by every Jehovah's Witness, family member or not, in your life. But there just isn't any follow-up to a judicial committee. That's where the comedy begins. This is supposed to be a healing with the wise and spiritual men of the congregation, as there's no laying of hands, but spiritually speaking, they're supposed to heal you. They're supposed to help you. They're supposed to guide you through this painful decision and how you can repent and come back. Let me assure you, and I will say this fairly emphatically, that does not happen. It doesn't happen. It doesn't. And if you're listening to this and you've been on a judicial committee or been, and I will say, victim of one, I have been both. I was a teenager who did all sorts of bad things. And after I was baptized and was a member of judicial committees, actually some unique spots, even when I was a servant. And then I obviously was part of those 3 guys that got to haul you in the B school and try to heal you and listen to you confess your sins to us, oftentimes in gratuitous ways. We'll get into that. Nonetheless, judicial committees have no substance, no basis in Scripture. Now, you could make an argument that Jehovah's Witnesses, as they do now, 3 men in strict confidentiality, that is a complete joke. Let me assure you, everybody knows. Not everybody on the elder body knows. And furthermore, most of their wives know. Okay. I'm just going to get it out of the way. Is that universal? No. There's some men who take it seriously. They're the minority. I will assure you of that from the outset. They are the minority. Whatever it is that you may confess finds its way into secret conversations, gossip. Well, we really need to be looking out for this person, so I'm just going to tell you what they did. And suddenly something that's incredibly private and painful is known by several people outside these 3 men that are part of your intimate judicial committee. But getting back to the foundation for this, there isn't any. There was no committees in the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society until really the late 1930s. So if you're keeping track of the Jehovah's Witness timeline at this point, you're once again asking yourself, wait a minute there, Stacy, wait a second. They chose Judge Joe and his buddies in 1919. Jesus did. He handpicked them. So you're telling me in 1919, he didn't lay down like Moses on Mount Sinai that are 10 commandments of how to handle judicial matters that are life and death for a Jehovah's Witness publisher? And my answer to you would be, that is correct. He did not, because all punitive actions, any kind of discipline, any kind of sin or notorious painful event was handled by the congregation up until about 1938. Open testimony. That people voted on what was supposed to happen next. Somewhat similar to Jewish procedures of the past, but certainly not with the foundation or the direct correlation with what Jehovah's Witnesses do now in these three-man judicial committee run situations. So Judge Joe in 1919 missed the memo from Jesus. So it wasn't until 1938 that Judge Joe completely eliminated the elder arrangement, and the service committee of about 3 guys in Brooklyn, New York was instituted. They became the justice for Jehovah's Witnesses. So up until that point, it was mostly heard openly in the congregation. People, I wasn't there, so I can't speak to this in real terms. They handled things more as a congregation. It seems, looking back historically, at least from older folks that I've talked to, that there was generally more empathy or compassion, but it certainly was not a star chamber of 3 guys in the B school telling you to pour your guts out and tell us some of the worst things that you've possibly done or that has been done to you. It simply wasn't the case. So again, keeping track of the timeline, up until 1938, mostly handled by the congregation. Judge Joe decides he's going to eliminate that whole elder arrangement, how we handle wrongdoing, all of that in 1938. He appoints 3 guys basically in Brooklyn to oversee justice that had to be communicated with. And then, subject for another episode, Jesus, who apparently has been watching on again since 1919, decides to reinstate the elder arrangement in the early 1970s. Interestingly, right about the time that whole governing body thing got discovered as well, 1971, 72. So the elder arrangement was reinstated in the 70s, and one of the things that came with it in full force was the modern day version of the Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee. 3 guys in the back room, some of them with all kinds of personal issues, because there isn't a man alive who doesn't have issues, problems, shortcomings, weaknesses, as we've come to know in life. Some of them literally in eager anticipation of this crap. Not just from the perspective of wielding power over someone else's life, but I think that anyone who's been a victim of a judicial committee, particularly in matters of sexuality, fornication, adultery, masturbation, any of those things, realizes there's some guys in the elder body that really like the deets. They like the details. And I will get into some of my experiences with that, where I had to shut down meetings as the head of the judicial meeting, the chairman, because of elders who just seemed to want a little bit more than was necessary for these situations. So, to start, the Judicial Committee, as we know it among Jehovah's Witnesses now, is absolutely, unequivocally not rooted in Scripture. It is not supported by the Bible, not in any way, shape, or form. Any of these matters in the past, and they know this, were handled in ancient times, according to the Bible, at the city gates by the elders or older men. It was open. There were witnesses. There was conversation. There was people there to add or offer comfort. There was people there to add and offer justice if they didn't feel that the person was truly repentant. But it was all done out in the open. And their own literature quotes this and recognizes it. Let me give you some examples. And yes, the irony runs deep, because they don't follow their own literature. They don't follow history, despite their constant reminder that everything they do is according to the Bible. That is not true, as we've come to learn and will continue to come to learn. But this is one of the more shocking ones, because judicial meetings and discipline from the pages of the Bible, as well as the mouths of Jehovah's Witnesses, is life and death, just like everything. If you don't handle this well at your judicial meeting, guess what? There's a fireball with your name with it, an earthquake crevasse that's going to open up and swallow you because you're unrepentant. for whatever terrible thing you might have done, which might be something as simple as a 13-year-old kid taking a puff off a cigarette, but they're baptized. So boom, they're in trouble with the Judicial Committee, C and the B school. But notice some of these quotes from Jehovah's Witness literature. The Awake of 1981, January 22nd, page 17, the 22nd, excuse me, Searching Out Legal Routes, where it says, quote, since the local court was situated at the city gates, there was no question about the trial being public. It quotes Deuteronomy 16:18 through 20. No doubt the public trials helped influence the judges toward carefulness and justice, qualities that sometimes vanish in secret star chamber hearings, end quote. The Bible, or excuse me, the Watchtower and Awake writers, in this case 1981, openly admit that any kind of delicate matter was handled at the city gates where the judges themselves would be under scrutiny as to whether they were careful, whether they were just, whether they were kind, and goes on to completely compare it in contrast to secret star chamber hearings, which is exactly, even in 1981 when they wrote this, what Jehovah's Witness elders on a judicial committee are doing. This is where you really get into deeper conversations, particularly with psychologists, about cognitive dissonance, about the human nature of following blindly leadership. They put it right under their nose, all the while they're not doing it themselves. And I want to remind you, this is life and death stuff. Life and death stuff. For those of us that are old enough, you might remember when the Insight on the Scriptures volumes were released among Jehovah's Witnesses. 2 big green books. They were very high quality, very, very nice, well written, beautiful illustrations, maps, all sorts of things. Within Insight on the Scriptures, volume 1, page 475, it has this to say. On entering the gates, one found himself in a large open space, the city's marketplace, the public square, where all kinds of selling and buying were carried on, and where contracts were made and sealed before witnesses. Here was the public forum where news was received and passed, where the elders held court. Insight on the Scriptures, volume 1, page 475. Insight on the Scriptures, volume 1, page 198, under the subheading Assembly. It says, when judicial matters required attention, a number of persons might assemble at the city gate. However, where gathered there or elsewhere, they would not all vote on the case under consideration in a democratic fashion. Instead, theocratically, respected older men would weigh matters in the light of God's law and then announce their decision. Notice this, quote, similarly, the early Christian congregation was represented in such matters, end quote. I could read 4 or 5 more quotes, but I think you get the general idea. The modern day Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee looks nothing like anything in the Bible. And that includes the New World Translation, their very well-doctored version of the Holy Scriptures. It simply doesn't support it. It wasn't done. A young woman, a teenage girl who's dealing with a sensitive matter physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally, was not brought into the B school with 3 middle-aged guys asking her intimate, devastating questions. And that is exactly what goes on today among Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm going to stay far away from one of the biggest, heinous, evil issues going on among Jehovah's Witnesses today, which is child sexual abuse, of which both young girls and boys are deeply damaged. I'm going to stay away from that. But can you fathom a child being subjected to this kind of an environment? And I don't care how you define child. I'm going to throw teenagers in there. Imagine that. 3 men. Again, prefacing by this by saying not all men had bad motives. They don't. There are men who care. There are men who are heartbroken. There are men who want to do the right thing. But there are those that don't. And there are those, like any human resource department in corporate America, whose sole objective in these meetings is to protect the organization, otherwise known as the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, from any salacious material, any problems, any spit in their eye, any bad press, you name it. It goes down a long list. And so today's modern day Judicial Committee of Jehovah's Witnesses is literally done in secret. It's done in the B school. If anything, if you grew up like I did, 70s and 80s, and you saw someone heading to the B school with 3 guys in their briefcases, everybody went, oh boy, oh man. And then you expect a week or 2 later to get an announcement from the stage that they've been disfellowshipped or publicly reproved. And if you never hear from it, as soon as you're old enough to understand this, you know that they've been privately reproved. Which means nothing, because they usually follow it up with what's called a local needs talk, where they talk about everything this person did without mentioning their name in the talk. And everyone goes, oh, young Johnny got drunk and had sex with that girl. Everybody knows what's going on. So a person, and I tend to veer towards young, inexperienced people, children, but this is true of adults as well. It's a devastating experience, particularly if you get 3 guys, even the most well-intentioned 3 guys, really, really struggle with what goes on in that B school, particularly with whatever the sinful matter may be, whatever devastating circumstance this person may have been a part of, whether it was done in evil terms, they meant to do it, or maybe it was an accident, or it was a moment of weakness. Let me give you an example of one. And this is kind of strange. I'm going to say it right at the outset for me to share some of this, because it makes it sound like I'm trying to color myself personally in a good light. Just know that I'm not, and I'm aware of how that might sound. I just know that I was different from a lot of people. I think that's why I was approachable. I think that's why I cared. And I was a judicial committee chairman so many times I can't even recall. And we'll get into how that works too. But frankly, it's not science, and there's no God magic involved whatsoever. It's usually the guy who's well studied, who cares and has a bigger heart in some cases, because the polar opposite happens all too often. Nonetheless, an experience. I was serving on a committee with 2 men who I genuinely loved. In fact, I would say I love them both to this day, although I haven't seen them in 15 years, and one of them has passed away. He was a much older man, a wonderful man, and as it turns out, and a simple man, a very simple man, meant the best, took care of people, was loyal, wasn't well studied, didn't know all the policies of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. At one point, he was the presiding overseer in our congregation, and someone that I'll always think of fondly. He's passed away. In this case, it happened to be a father-son group. So there was me as the judicial chairman, and then there was this man, the older man, and his son, who's also a very wonderful man. I know his heart means well. He deals with massive depression, as I knew at the time, but he was a man who had given his entire life to Jehovah's Witnesses, both as a pioneer, missionary, special construction work, went to other countries. Him and his wife really, truly were friends, and they were good people, although they were flawed, just like I was. They were flawed. She clearly had problems with alcohol. He had problems with depression. And he was very good at cutting people off despite his big heart. But he was also someone that did a lot of wonderful things for people. So to set that groundwork, we're in this meeting with a young woman, and she comes forth, and I will get into the structure of a judicial committee right from the pages of their own Elders Shepherding the Flock handbook here in a moment. But as you come into these, really try to set the tone that you're there. Well, at least I did. I'll speak for myself. That it's my podcast, right? I'm just going to give it from my perspective. I really want to make sure, particularly when she was a younger woman, I believe early 20s, that I cared. I cared about her. I cared about what she was going through. And she came to us, the 3 of us, and she sat down and she began to tell us what she'd been a part of, and she'd had sex. In this case, though, as we began to ask questions, and man, can those go sideways, not on any committee I was a part of after I learned in my younger years. This was more in my mature years towards the end. We were able to ask the kind of questions we needed to try to understand what she went through. Well, as the story went on, she began to really fidget, and she started to shake, and she started to breathe very deep and start crying. And I realized in that moment she was having a panic attack. She was having a full-blown panic attack, and it was visible, and it's not something you can fake. She was terrified. She was scared. And as the story went along, what I realized during the panic attack, and we never really know, folks, that's the whole problem with this stupid arrangement. We never really know what's going on in the heart of someone else. But I began to feel like the whole story wasn't there. Well, as the story went on, it became pretty apparent, even by her own admission, that it was basically a date rape situation, that she was forced into a situation physically, and she was having a reaction with the three of us in the B school, literally in the B school of our Kingdom Hall. And she started to, I don't want to say she started to convulse, but if you've ever seen a panic attack, it's ugly and it's painful and it's scary. And the two men, both of whom I respected and loved, and I still do, sat there, stone-faced, didn't move to her aid, didn't move to touch her hand, didn't move to do anything. Well, she lifted herself up from this chair in a panic, in a fervor, and I could tell she couldn't breathe, and she was crying so hard. I literally got out of my chair, and I just went over and I held her. God, I'm getting emotional talking about this. I'm really sorry. It hurts, man. It really hurts. And wow, getting emotional. I just held her. She could barely breathe. And it was one of the last judicial committees I was ever on. And it's where I really realized how wrong this is. How wrong. There wasn't a woman there, a tender female, someone to hold her. It was me. And I didn't know her that well. She was one of the younger girls in the hall I didn't know that well. Most of them I'd grown up with, and I knew them since they were babies, and not her. And I did know her family, and I just held her. And while I was holding her, I turned to look at my two comrades, the elders on this judicial committee, and this father and son elder team sat there stone-faced. And I wasn't mad at them. I knew them both intimately. They're very good men in their heart, men that had had an impact on my life, frankly, when I was a teenager. They were a little older than me, even the son. But it really began to hit me how bad it all was. She really just needed comfort. And even if she had had sex with someone, she was still having this reaction. And it was then that I realized there's nothing. Look, that's not even true. I knew well beyond this that there was nothing magical about judicial committees. You had to hope and pray you got an elder, maybe two, or maybe if you're lucky, all three, that cared. Most of them showed up ill-prepared, wanting to mail it in, lay down the law, and push them out. And when I say out, maybe out of the congregation, maybe just out into the hall so they could get on and get home. Yeah, I know it's crass, folks, but it's the truth. Did it. This poor young girl, and what's really strange is I don't remember what happened to her. She stayed in the congregation for a time. We privately reproved her after it's so sickening. Who are we to be doing it? It's amazing that I even say that stuff still. But I talked with the other men. They saw the physical reaction, which took a great deal to de-escalate. And what I did, they never moved from their chairs. They sat there like statues. I think they were terrified, if I'm being honest with you. They didn't know how to react to this with this poor woman. And she left. I know that she didn't stay a Jehovah's Witness. I think time went on. Of course, I didn't, so who knows? But it was horrifying. And it was one of several that gutted me as a human being. There are others. I'll lace them in here as I tell this story because I wasn't really sure how to build the format of this subject, if I'm being really honest with you. So I warned you at the beginning, I'm going to ramble. And that's what I'm doing. It's raw. It is what it is. I will tell you that judicial committees really come down to the luck of the draw. Who you get can make or break your life, can make or break you being a Jehovah's Witness past that night, can make or break what goes on next with your family, with a mate. 3 guys. And I'm going to get this out of the way real early. And I'm going to give you the stuff right from their own literature so that you know this. Okay. How do you get there? How do these 3 men end up with some precious person's life in their hands in the B school of a building? Well, let's just go back to how it starts. So for those that aren't familiar, and if you are familiar, and I know there's lots of ex-elders that listen to this podcast, and I love you guys. I appreciate your comments. They mean a lot to me. Suggestions always welcome. That what happens is somebody commits a sin, or somebody's seen someone commit a sin, or they know of someone committing a sin, and they go report it. They're supposed to, according to Matthew 18, the Bible, go to that person and encourage them first, if you haven't read that chapter, to go report it. But if they don't, it's now responsible on them. The weight of the world of this person's poor secrets and pain, they need to go tell somebody about it, because this is all done under the umbrella of we must keep the congregation clean. I won't even get into the fact that when you walk into an elders meeting at the end of, usually in my time, it was after the service meeting on a Thursday night, all the elders pile in and the whole congregation kind of walks, sees them all going to the back room, and oh boy, what's going on? Oh, anticipation. Some people just lap it up. It's bizarre. But as you enter that room as an elder, I mean, myself, in my time as an elder, went through hell, went through a divorce, wasn't giving the time to my child I should have, had tons of guilt, had all kinds of other problems. I then started dating sisters. I was a flawed man. But you walk into that room and you're walking into a room with a bunch of guys, you know all their flaws, all of them. I knew each and every guy's flaws, some of them some really dirty laundry, particularly in how they raise their kids, particularly with alcohol, particularly with porn. I knew it all. But you pile into this room, and whoever's up there at my time, the presiding overseer was still a thing. It's no longer a thing as of 2022. But the presiding overseer would tell you, look, something's come to our attention. John Doe or Susie Doe have done something bad, and we need to form a judicial committee. And almost like clockwork, you watch every guy try to bury his head down in his lap like, I want nothing to do with this. Now, again, my perspective, I served in one congregation the majority of my time as an elder. But I can tell you we were a popular congregation. We were seen as hip, cool, warm, loving, a little looser. But even then, you would look around at men that I'd grown up with as a teenager and had to sit in front of with my own sins as a kid. We'll get to that another episode. I don't think we'll have time. But I look around at these much wiser men that I looked up to, and everybody's burying their face in a book. Like, not me. There isn't anything fun about serving on a judicial committee. Nothing. For one, it's painful for those that care. You hurt for someone and you care about them and you love them. For another, it's time consuming. This may make you sick to hear this, but a lot of those guys don't want to do the paperwork. There's paperwork. You got to send it all back to New York. You got to wait to see if they agree with your judgment on this matter. You've got to listen to a bunch of terrible stuff. You might learn more terrible stuff. And everybody's like, I'm out. And so what the congregation is told is that the Holy Spirit appoints these men, that God magic moves throughout the room, and Jehovah and Jesus manipulate the men into position that are going to best serve this wonderful sheep who's fallen on hard times. Let me read from the Shepherd, the Flock of God book. For those new to this, that's the secret elders book. That's so easy to get now. It's ridiculous. This is directly from the 2022 edition of Shepherd, the Flock of God. I've long turned in my old copy of the book on my last day as an elder, but I imagine that I have a new copy It says this: when selecting the judicial committee and the chairman, remember, life and death, don't fool yourself. Your relationship with God and Jesus is on the line. So is your time in the congregation with men, women, your family, your friends, maybe your job. All of this is on the line. It says this: number one, and this is from chapter 15, Preparing for Judicial Committees, from their super top secret book that ain't so top secret. It says this in subject line 1: while extensive details of a case do not need to be conveyed to the entire body of elders, in other words, just the details of the sex, or how many cigarettes, or how much blood, or how much money you ripped off, those kind of details, you still know the general idea of what this person's done. Back to the book: enough information should be presented for them to determine whether a disfellowshipping offense has actually been committed, and if so, who are best qualified to handle the type of case that has arisen. Let me assure you that rarely comes into play. Sometimes, rarely. In other words, you got a new elder, and boy, are they appointing them young now in their 20s. I was the youngest one in our circuit at the time, 27. I was a baby. They're appointing them younger now. You're not going to put him probably on a child abuse case. Probably not, to be fair. Goes on to say, when the elders determine that a judicial committee is needed, those who are present at the meeting should choose the elders who will serve on the committee and designate which one will be chairman. The elders chosen should be men of discernment and good judgment. It is usually best for our newer elders to serve first with more experienced ones. They would never serve as observers on a judicial case. The committee should be made up of 3 elders. However, complex cases may warrant having 4 or even 5 experienced elders on the committee. So, there are plenty of other regulations, most of them quite boring, but that's how it happens. That's a very sterile version of what happens. What really happens is you might have 10 guys on the body of elders. They go in the B school. Everybody looks around and desperately tries to dodge being part of this judicial committee. That was my experience, at least. Nobody was eager to jump on board with that. And then what happens is literally conversations take place like this: well, I was on the last one. I'd like to not be on this one. Or, oh, I'm really good friends with their parents. I don't want anything to do with this. It's okay. That's good. That's actually part of this in the elders book that's suggested to use good judgment when appointing these 3. But there's no magic behind it, folks. It oftentimes comes down to who has been on the last few, who's worn out, who's going to be in town next Thursday night to have this meeting with this person in the B school, who is really willing to do all the paperwork. How complex is it? I'm not very smart. I don't want to do that. That was a real conversation I heard. Real conversation. Oh, I've known them since they're a baby. I don't want in. These are the kinds of things that go into how to put together a judicial committee of Jehovah's Witnesses when their life is on the line. So, while it's not a blanket case of bad judgment, there is a lot of bad judgment. There's a lot of shaky stuff going down. And I'll tell you where it gets really weird. And I served on countless judicial committees. I was active from the time I was appointed, which is horrifying to look back on. But I at least feel good because I have some sense of judgment, some sort of social skills, some sort of compassion. I served with a lot of guys that did not. And I don't probably need to tell anybody that may have stumbled upon this podcast and as part of a judicial committee, you know what I'm saying. Awkward guys, socially strange guys, guys that are too old, guys that have no idea what's going on with the younger generation today. See, that's where I fit in. I was still young. I was still hip and cool to the teenagers. Not so with the older guys. Guys who don't even understand phraseology, some of the vernacular, some of the slang. They just don't get it. But where I was particularly horrified was serving with guys, and it always comes back to this with me. I don't know why. I think it was my experience with guys that had teenagers. And I can't tell you, I wasted a decade of my life helping the other elders' teenagers. They were all leading double lives. So imagine me sitting there with Brother John Doe and Brother Joe Blow to my right and my left, judging some poor teenage kid when I already know that they, as parents, have no idea how to control their teenage kid, who's probably involved with the same teenage kid that's sitting in front of one of us. It was just hypocrisy. There's no way around it. And it was bizarre and unsettling. It was uncomfortable. You get into a lot of nepotism and nepotic decision making. And furthermore, it completely flies in the face of anything Jehovah's Witnesses teach as to the judicial arrangement, which is you open it with a prayer, you read a couple of scriptures. This is all in the Elders book, by the way. I won't bore you to tears by reading all of it. And Jehovah's Spirit descends on the kingdom hall and descends into the minds and the hearts of these brothers so that they can make wise, compassionate justice, protecting everyone else out there in the main hall from the evils of the 13-year-old boy who just felt up a girl in 7th grade and touched a breast for the first time. Yeah, you think I'm being facetious? I am not. This is real stuff. It flies in the face of that because it isn't true. It isn't true. I was consistently staggered by men showing up to the judicial meeting completely ill-prepared. Completely ill-prepared. They didn't even know, in some cases, what the person had been through. They didn't understand the gravity or even somewhat roundabout details, because that's why we're there, of the details of the sin. But I'll tell you what they didn't do. They didn't prepare to speak about it. They didn't prepare to help them. They just showed up like, okay, like we see in every other religion, Christian, mostly Judean Christian religions. This person's going to confess. They're going to unload all their sins. They're going to repent, and I'm here to listen. All right. But as for the part, the balm of Gilead, the Holy Spirit, the healing, the compassion and love, the ongoing shepherding that happens after they're disciplined in this B school, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen unless you're fortunate enough to just get a loving, wonderful guy who just cares about you and may look in after you, make a few calls, make sure to come up and talk to you at the meetings and see how things are going. Yeah, it happens. The true gravity, the true healing, folks, these men aren't qualified. I wasn't qualified. Not qualified at all. Keep in mind that in these judicial meetings, men are listening to things that are literally life and death. And not just life and death, but so psychologically damaging and soul crushing. I sat in meetings and listened to a poor woman, as I already mentioned, express the devastation of rape. I listened to wonderful guys tell me that they knew they were gay. What were they going to do? I listened to multiple child abuse and sexual assault survivors. I actually was appointed by Brooklyn Bethel at the time to teach at Kingdom Ministry School, teach the other elders what to do in these situations. So don't let anyone tell you that they don't cover it. They cover it. They cover it. I was there. I taught it. It hurts to say that. But to remotely think that any one of these three guys are qualified for the complexity, the pain, the mental health issues, the love needed to heal and help someone through what might be the worst up to that point moment of their life is categorically absurd. Now, the one thing that they can offer, that I tried to offer, and I know other men did too, is love, compassion, forgiveness, assurance. At the time, I was a Christian. I was a believer. I assured them of Jehovah God's love, and I showed them, and I read it, and I cried with them. I had people do that with me, by the way, when I was a teenager. So there are other men. It wasn't me. I wasn't special. There are other men. But that's not the majority, folks. It's not the majority. And I'm sure if you're listening right now and you've been through a judicial committee, and God, I hope you're not going through one now and you're listening, I hope that you get someone like that, but that's not the majority. You'll sit on judicial committees as an elder where you can see that one of the guys has an axe to grind. It might be someone they don't like, and now I got something on you. Now I got something on you. You touched a girl where? Wow. Here comes the punishment. Don't fool yourself. Human beings are human beings, and there's no God magic in that room. I will relate it in another podcast episode, but when I was removed as an elder, I actually stepped down, but then was told it was a removal. I'll get into that. It's a story unto itself. I actually went after a circuit overseer for his lack of love. So it doesn't just limit it to elders, but even the best-hearted ones aren't qualified to handle some of the things they listen to in a judicial meeting. Judicial committees can go sideways in seconds. I mentioned the absurdity of coming to a meeting where someone's life, a spiritual life, which is by Jehovah's Witness standards, light years more important than your physical life, because it means everlasting life in paradise on earth. They come to these meetings ill-prepared. Many of these men haven't even read their Bibles. They can't offer any counsel from the Bible unless they've written some notes down. They don't even know the Bible. It's staggering. You think I'm exaggerating or taking pot shots because I'm out. I can assure you I am not. I am not. I could reel off 10, 12 women, sisters I knew that knew the Bible light years better than elders I served with. But they come into this meeting. Imagine going to a hospital for a major operation, let's say a brain surgery, and you found out the guy operating on you has never even read the manual. He's never been to medical school. Folks, that's many, many Jehovah's Witness elders. That is many, many judicial committees. They come in there going, another round of fornication. Okay, they got it on with somebody. Let's find out, exactly what happened. And that is another area that judicial meetings go sideways, and you learn a lot about these guys that are serving as elders with you. The questions. And oh man, I've got family members. I've got people that I'm still close with and love that have been through some horrifying judicial committees because of sins they committed, admittedly. But the level of questions, I remember, I'll relate one more experience here. Being in a judicial meeting, again, imagine this, once again with a woman. Boy, we may have to do 2 of these episodes with some of these experiences on judicial committees. But was with a woman. She was a very nice person, wonderful girl, had been single a long time. Finally met a man who was interested in her, wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. Oh my God, there's nothing worse than that, is there? But he liked her, and he was nice to her. And as what happens with men, women, women and women, men and men, when you become romantically involved with someone, you get physical. And she got physical for the first time in her life, despite being an adult woman. And I can tell you that I had to shut this meeting down. I was the judicial chairman. Again, looking back, I was chairman far too often. When one of the elders was asking the kind of questions that, and I'm going to try to be delicate because this shows up on YouTube, how many times she climaxed? Did she like it? Where was she touched? How many times did he touch her there? Did he touch him there? Okay, you get the idea. I'm going to shut it down. Just like I did the meeting where I asked her to please step out of the room. And I turned with my temper, which was infamous, frankly, still is. And I looked at the guy and said, "Are you kidding me? We don't need to know any of this. We don't need to know any of it. She already walked in here and said I committed fornication. I committed it 4 times. Okay, good. That's it. That's it." Nope. You're going to find there's people, and this is actually in the pages of the Watchtower as well, particularly the old elders manuals, where you have to dig deeper. Let's find out how truly repentant they are. As if somehow you reach climax during intercourse once and you go back for twice, that means you're unrepentant of it. This is the kind of judgment you're giving into the hands of men. I had to shut the meeting down, and it wasn't the one and only time I did it. Like, you don't need to ask those questions. You don't need to know what she was wearing. You don't need to know how long it lasted. You don't need to know at all. But yet, here it is. And I'm going to read it to you here. Again, chapter 15, Procedure for Judicial Hearings, out of the 2022 Shepherd the Flock of God Elders Manual, number 11, says this: each case is different. The Judicial Committee should consider what they know about the wrongdoer's background. What? And any factors unique to the case. This will help the Judicial Committee to understand the wrongdoer better. Then it says in 12, the same is true regarding wrongdoers who suffer from mental or emotional problems. Boy, that list is long for all of us. If the wrongdoer is able to carry out normal daily activities and is viewed by the community as being accountable for his actions and decisions, the congregation should not overlook his wrongdoing. And there you have it, folks. There you have it. And I said it myself. I told you I'd come clean on this in my own experiences. I remember dealing with someone who was chronically committing sin, and because that's what we do. I did it myself. And they were meeting people and they were having lots of sex. And I remember myself throwing myself under the bus here, even saying, yeah, and she admitted to being depressed. I remember in a moment of frustration because of trying to protect her and trying to keep her in the congregation and trying not to disfellowship her. I remember saying one of the other elders when she was out of the room, I'm so depressed, I pull my pants down. I am so ashamed to admit that to you folks, but I remember that. I remember doing it. I remember my own cognitive dissonance, my own shameful commentary. But that's what's pounded into you as an elder. And you see it here in the instructions, and I'll read it again, number 12 in the flock book. If the wrongdoer is able to carry out normal daily activities, drive a car, hold a job, and is viewed by the community as being accountable for his actions and decisions, having sex because they like it and they want companionship, the congregation should not overlook his wrongdoing. And so you have it, the hammer, where every elder can then say, okay, you did this more than once. Well, twice means you're not repentant. Or you hold down a job, but you can't seem to stop sleeping with people. On and on it goes, which only serves to magnify the absurdity of taking a complex human being and marching them into the B school of a kingdom hall to sit in front of three men they likely do not know intimately, don't trust, are terrified of, to pour out their deepest, darkest, most brutal experiences in the hopes that these three dudes are having a good day and don't throw them out of the kingdom hall away from their family, their support group, their jobs, the people they love, oftentimes the only world they've ever known. If you're a kid baptized at 8, 9, and 10, which happens all the time, suddenly you've discovered that you like sex, and it happens a few times, you are terrified. You're terrified now that the hormones have kicked in, that they're going to cut you off from everyone and everything you know. I really wanted to tackle this. It was on my mind based on something a call I got. We'll leave it at that. That the Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee is a loaded gun, and it's insane. I shared a couple of my own experiences with you. Some of them got into crazy, funny stuff. Some of them got into stuff I'm deeply ashamed that I was ever a part of. Nothing that involved children. You probably picked up that with me, that I was probably hell on earth in those situations when it came to kids, but stuff with elderly people, stuff with cigarettes, stuff with somebody who couldn't break a habit of nicotine, that I was part of a group that got them removed at an old age. Just disturbing stuff I have to live with, but stuff that I'm coming clean on and sharing now in this podcast, because I want anyone that's even thinking about going into the B school with three guys to know what may happen in there, what they might encounter. Here's a quick hit list, a notepad. There's no God magic in that room. There's no Holy Spirit. Jehovah and Jesus aren't watching on, influencing and impacting completely faulty men to come up with a life and death decision on your behalf. It's not. It's the luck of the draw. Hope that the three of them are in a good mood. Hope that the three of them have never been damaged or hurt by something you may have done that's bringing back open wounds. Hope that they're educated. Hope that they actually care about you. All of that comes into play in a Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee if you are to come out on the right end of it. Otherwise, there's a very real chance with the hundreds of variables, some of which I just shared in this episode, may have you on the outside looking in for something that's just human. Something you might not be proud of, something that might even be serious, but something that you as a human being have the right to be forgiven for, helped for, not kicked to the curb for. I often looked at Jehovah's Witness judicial committees, and I feel like this was as profound a thought that I ever had as an elder, if I'm being honest. And I looked at an elder once, a very wise one, a very popular one in our circuit, in even our district, who was also a very dear friend at the time. And I told him once, I have a real problem with this arrangement, which was risky on my behalf. And he was a close enough and smart enough guy to go, there's times I do too. What's your issue? And I looked at him, I said, when a man or woman walk into that room for a judicial meeting, what are they afraid of? And he looked at me and he said, well, they're afraid of getting disfellowshipped. And I said, right. Why aren't they afraid of hurting Jehovah's heart? They've already done it. They've already hurt God. They're not afraid of the pain or the ache of losing a relationship with their father, their daddy, their papa. They're afraid of us. They're afraid of us, of being disfellowshipped. Do you see a problem with that? And I'll never forget the look on his face. He didn't answer. He ended up being somebody that was pretty impactful in my own leaving in ways he doesn't probably realize. But he couldn't answer that because he knew I was right. The judicial committees of Jehovah's Witnesses are 100% man-made. They started in roughly 1938. They gained big-time steam in the early 70s. And today, Jehovah's Witnesses and the governing body, those 8 guys in upstate New York who have direct phone line to Jesus, they use judicial committees to strike fear in every Jehovah's Witness. Fear even when they're not looking, that they too could be kicked out, unloved, and pushed away from everything they've ever known. More to come on this subject, folks. Raw, rambling all over the board. I admit it. A little passionate about this one. Maybe, do I say that every week? I think I do. I want to thank everybody who's listening. I want to thank everybody who's reaching out. The comments on YouTube are phenomenal. The DMs I'm getting on Instagram, I really appreciate it. Fellow elders, fellow just people, because that's all I am. I just happen to have landed in some weird role there while I was there. Love the commentary from some of the women and some of the wonderful things you're sharing as well. So I want to thank you for listening this week as we tackle the Star Chamber impact of the Jehovah's Witness Judicial Committee. I'm going to have more to say on this one because I still see people on Twitter and elsewhere that continue to meet with the elders when they decide to leave. And I just want to tell you, you don't need to. They're nobody. I'm not going to say that as a blanket statement because you may have family, you may have reasons for being physically in, mentally out, PMOs. I respect that deeply. But just know that the elders are just a bunch of guys. There's no magic. I promise. I promise. Thanks for joining me this week on Surviving Paradise. I think we took a tumble down the hill on the paradise, the spiritual paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses today. I want to encourage you, have no fear, live your life, be good to yourself, be good to others, forgive people. We're all just schmoes making our way on a big rock floating around in a big, big universe and beyond. So thank you, folks. I appreciate you joining me this week on Surviving Paradise. Let's see what I come up with next week. I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what, I'll see you next week. Thanks again.